The structure of the collapsed star freighter groaned a sound like a dying god gasping for air through a crushed throat. Harold stood amidst the wreckage, his boots magnetic locked to the buckled deck plating. The air inside his helmet tasted of recycled ozone and the stale coffee he had consumed 3 hours ago. Around him, the salvage site was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered composite, illuminated only by the harsh cutting beams of the shoulder-mounted floodlights worn by his team. Dust motes, disturbed, after decades of silence, floated in the zero-gravity pockets, like gray snow shimmering as they drifted through the beams of light. He checked his oxygen gauge. He had 40 minutes of air left. Enough time to cut through one more bulkhead, verify the manifest, and get out before the unstable superstructure decided to embrace gravity and fold in on itself completely. Harold was a big man built like a siege engine that had been retired and repurposed for heavy lifting. His movement was economical, devoid of wasted energy. Every step was a calculation of mass and momentum. He was a veteran of the gravity wars, and it showed in the way he moved, as if the universe weighed more for him than it did for anyone else, and he simply did not care. He raised his heavy cutter, the plasma tip glowing a furious blue. He was about to slice into a sealed compartment, labeled with warnings that had faded 50 years ago when his sensor suite pinged. It was a faint thermal signature. Impossible. This sector had been cold for a century. Harold paused, his thick fingers hovering over the control stud of his cutter. He tapped his helmet comms. "Sector 4 clear," he grumbled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against the interior of his helmet. "Moving to the secondary support strut. I am picking up a ghost signal." He walked toward a massive slab of fallen alloy, a piece of hull plating thick enough to stop a railgun round. The thermal reading was coming from beneath it. The physics of it made no sense. Nothing living should be here. Nothing breathing. He braced his shoulder against the slab. His suit servos whined a high-pitched mechanical protest as he engaged the hydraulic assist. With a grunt that was more annoyance than exertion, Harold shoved. The metal screamed, grinding against the deck as he levered it up and over. The slab crashed down a few feet away, sending a fresh cloud of debris swirling into the vacuum-sealed environment. Harold directed his lights downward. He blinked, unsure if the oxygen deprivation was starting to set in early. Curled together in the hollow beneath the wreckage, shielded by a pocket of structural beams that had miraculously held, were two figures. They were not human. Not entirely. They were Felisari. The features were unmistakable, even covered in the grime of the ruins. High cheekbones, ears that tapered to elegant tufted points atop their heads, and a fine, shimmering layer of fur that ran along their jawlines and vanished down their necks like the collar of a regal coat. Two sisters. One had hair the color of midnight, the other the color of smoke. They were unconscious, their breathing shallow, their ornate clothing torn and stained with hydraulic fluid. "Command," Harold said, his voice flat. "I have survivors. 2 civilians. Felisari origin. Prep the medbay." He knelt, his movements surprisingly careful for a man encased in 300 pounds of hardened exosuit. He reached out to check the pulse of the darker-haired one, the older one by the look of her sharp features. Her eyes snapped open. They were vertical slits of molten gold, wide with terrifying primal panic. She did not see a rescuer. She saw a looming silhouette of metal and glass, a monster from the void. The reaction was instantaneous. She shrieked, a sound that the suit's audio dampeners barely filtered, and lashed out. It was a strike born of pure instinct and high-born combat training, a palm strike aimed directly at the faceplate of his helmet, or what she perceived as his face. But Harold had opened his faceplate moments ago to wipe a sensor condensation issue. Her hand connected directly with his jaw. Crack. The sound was dry and sickening, like a dry branch stepping on a winter leaf. It echoed louder than the groaning metal of the ship. The woman froze. Harold did not move. He did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply stood there, his jaw slightly set, looking down at her. The woman looked at her hand. Her wrist was bent at an angle that anatomy did not allow. The adrenaline had masked the pain for a fraction of a second, but now it hit her. Her face went pale, her golden eyes widening in horrific realization. She had slapped him, and he had not moved, but her own bones had surrendered to the impact. She made a small, strangled noise, cradling her broken wrist against her chest. Harold let out a long, weary sigh. He looked at the woman, then at her hand, and then back at her face. "I am sorry," Harold said, his tone genuinely apologetic. "Is my face too hard?" Beside the injured woman, the younger sister stirred. She had lighter fur and softer eyes, the color of polished jade. She blinked, processing the scene, the hulking armored man, her sister's twisted wrist, and the absurdity of the apology. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, a hysterical high-pitched sound, before she clamped a hand over her mouth, looking at her sister with wide, fearful eyes. To laugh at the highborn sister was surely a crime even in a shipwreck. "Do not laugh, Maggie," the injured woman hissed through gritted teeth, though her voice trembled with agony. "He is made of stone. He is a golem." "I am not a golem," Harold corrected gently. "I am a salvager, and you are in shock." He reached out again. The older sister, Jenny, flinched, pressing herself back against the debris. But there was nowhere to go. Harold scooped her up. It was not a romantic gesture. It was the way a construction worker picks up a bag of cement. Yet there was a bizarre, calculated gentleness to it. He supported her back and her knees, ensuring her broken wrist was not jostled. She thrashed weakly. "Put me down. You smell of grease and cheap oxidizer." "And you smell like you are bleeding internally," Harold noted dryly. "Hold still, or you will make it worse." The sensory overload was hitting Jenny hard. The smell of the veteran salt, old iron, and the sharp tang of industrial lubricant was overwhelming to her sensitive Felisari nose. It was the scent of war, of labor, of things she had viewed only from the safety of a palace spire. She felt the hardness of the chest plate beneath her cheek. It did not give way. It was unyielding. While Harold secured Jenny, the younger sister, Maggie was scrambling to her feet. She was shaking, her movements fluid, but erratic. She looked around the small hollow that had been their prison for who knew how long. Her eyes caught a pulse of light from beneath a pile of shattered ceramic tiles. It was a rhythm. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Maggie reached down her gloved fingers, brushing aside the dust. There, embedded in the debris, was a core. It was roughly the size of a grapefruit, multifaceted, and glowing with a deep violet light. It was not just humming. It was vibrating a low frequency that she felt in her teeth. It sounded like a growl, a mechanical, angry purr. "What is that?" Harold asked, turning his head as the lights on his suit swept over the object. Maggie hesitated. She looked at the object, then at Harold. She felt a strange pull, a desire to protect the thing, but the fear of being left behind was stronger. "I do not know. It was near the structural collapse. It is warm." "Salvage," Harold grunted. "Grab it. Put it in the containment bag on my hip. We are leaving." "It feels angry," Maggie whispered, but she obeyed. She picked up the object. It was heavier than it looked. As she dropped it into the reinforced pouch at Harold's waist, the object seemed to shudder, changing its rhythm to match the heavy, slow thud of Harold's own heartbeat. "Let's move," Harold commanded. "My oxygen is at 15%, and your sister is turning a shade of gray that I do not think is natural for your species." The extraction was a blur of motion and nausea for Jenny. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the absolute stability of the arms holding her. The world spun metal, shrieked, and gravity fluctuated, but the man holding her was a fixed point in the universe. He did not stumble. They boarded Harold's ship, a vessel that had clearly seen better decades. It was a patchwork of repairs and upgrades, functional, but ugly. The airlock hissed shut, cycling atmosphere, with a sound like a giant exhaling relief. Harold marched straight to the medical bay, a sterile white room, that looked out of place in the grimy ship. "Dr. Selma," Harold barked. "I need a trauma scan, now." Dr. Selma Cade turned from her console. She was a sharp-featured woman, with gray hair tied back in a severe bun, wearing a lab coat that was surprisingly crisp. She took one look at the Felisari woman in Harold's arms and raised an eyebrow. "You went for scrap metal and came back with royalty," Selma observed, her voice dry. "Put her on the bio-bed, gently. She is not a crate of thruster parts, Harold." Harold deposited Jenny on the bed. The mattress hummed, molding to her shape. Maggie hovered nearby, clutching her own arms, her eyes darting between the instruments and her sister. "Wrist fracture," Harold reported, removing his helmet and placing it on a counter with a heavy clank. His face was revealed fully for the first time. He had a square jaw, gray eyes, that looked like storm clouds, and a scar running through his left eyebrow. "She struck me," Selma blinked. She looked at Jenny's shattered wrist, then at Harold's jaw. There wasn't even a bruise on him. "She hit you?" Selma asked, suppressing a smile. "And she broke—" "I apologized," Harold said defensively. "Scan initiated," Selma announced, typing commands into the holographic interface. Beams of light swept over Jenny, then widened to include Harold, who was standing too close. The holographic display flared to life, projecting the skeletal structures of both individuals in midair. Jenny, regaining her senses, thanks to a pain relief hypospray Selma had administered, looked up at the projection. Her eyes widened. Her own skeleton was elegant, thin, bird-like in its fragility. The bones were hollow in places, designed for agility and grace, typical of the Felisari physiology. Then she looked at Harold's projection. It was a monstrosity of density. His bones were not just thick. They were solid white on the scan, opaque to the sensors. The structure was reinforced, laced with high-density carb lattice grafting. His spine was a column of interlocking armored plates. His ribcage looked like the roll bar of an atmospheric tank. "By the stars," Jenny whispered, the pain in her wrist momentarily forgotten in the face of this biological horror. "You were not born. You were poured." "High-gravity combat modification," Dr. Selma said clinically, zooming in on Harold's shoulder joint. "Retired standard. Terran Vanguard issue. His skeletal density is 400% of the human norm. He is essentially a walking anvil." Jenny looked at Harold with a mixture of revulsion and awe. Her pride, usually her strongest armor, felt dented. She had tried to slap an anvil. No wonder her wrist had snapped like a dry twig. "Do Terrans carry rocks in their bodies just to be difficult?" Jenny spat out, trying to regain some semblance of superiority. "Is it not enough to be clumsy? You must be dense as well." Harold was unbuckling the upper plating of his suit. He paused, looking at her with that maddeningly calm expression. "No," Harold said. "I do not carry rocks. I carry tuition bills. And right now, the hazard pay for pulling you out of that hole is the only reason I am not complaining about the dent you might have put in my finish." Maggie let out a sudden snort of laughter. She covered her mouth immediately, her eyes darting to Jenny. "I am sorry, sister. It was the delivery." Jenny glared at Maggie, then back at Harold. "I am Jenny of House Kale. This is my sister Maggie. You will address us with the proper honorifics once we are returned to the Felisari Spire." "I will address you as patient until Dr. Selma says you are clear," Harold retorted. He turned to the doctor. "Is she going to keep the hand?" "It is a clean break," Selma said, her hands moving rapidly over the controls to set the bone knitter. "She will be fine in 20 hours. But she needs rest. And you, Harold, need to look at the comms. You have a call." "I am busy," Harold grunted. "It is Nina," Selma said. Harold froze. The immovable object suddenly looked terrified. "Nina. Now it is 2 in the afternoon sector time. She should be in the Academy simulation." "She is on line 1, Selma said, smiling wickedly. "She says it is urgent." Harold sighed, a sound of deep paternal suffering. He tapped the comms panel on the wall. A holographic window popped up. A young girl, perhaps 14, with messy hair, and Harold's gray eyes appeared. She was wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. "Dad," Nina chirped. She squinted at the background. "Why are you in the medbay? Did you drop an engine block on your foot again?" "I never dropped it on my foot. It was a glancing blow." Harold defended himself immediately. "And I am fine. I am working." Nina leaned into the camera, her eyes narrowing. She saw the 2 Felisari women in the background. Her mouth formed a perfect O. "Dad," she said slowly, "what did you pick up this time? Last month it was a crate of unstable isotopes that you said looked lonely. Now it is space cats." Maggie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. The tension of the crash, the fear of death, and the sheer absurdity of this giant stone man being bullied by a teenager was too much. "They are not space cats, Nina," Harold said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "They are survivors. House Kale. Very important. Very fragile." "She is pretty," Nina observed, pointing at Jenny. "She looks like she wants to bite you." "She already tried to hit me," Harold muttered. It went poorly for her. Jenny bristled, sitting up straighter on the biobed. "I am right here, child. And I do not bite. I execute judgment." "Cool," Nina said, unimpressed. "Hey, Dad, the Academy tuition reminder came in. Just saying. Love you, bye." The link cut. Harold stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned back to the room. The silence was heavy. "She seems spirited," Maggie offered kindly. "She is expensive," Harold corrected, though his voice lacked any real bite. He looked at the 2 sisters. "Rest. We are setting a course for the Felisari Spire. It is a 6-hour burn at cruising speed." He turned to leave, but Maggie spoke up. Her voice was quiet, trembling slightly. "Captain Harold." He paused at the door. "Just Harold." "The ruins," Maggie said. She glanced at the pouch on Harold's hip where the relic was stowed. "They did not collapse because of age." Harold turned slowly. "Explain." "I saw the resonance patterns on the walls before the ceiling came down," Maggie said, her fingers twisting together. "The metal was not rusted through. It was vibrated apart, at a molecular level. Someone used a frequency weapon to bring that structure down on top of us." The room went cold. Dr. Selma stopped her calibration of the bone knitter. Jenny looked at her sister, her golden eyes darkening. "Are you certain, Maggie?" Jenny asked softly. "I know what resonance decay looks like," Maggie insisted. "It leaves a spiral pattern in the dust. I saw it." Harold looked at the 2 women. He had thought this was a simple salvage and rescue, a lucky find. Now it sounded like a hit job. "Selma," Harold said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of humor. "Run a passive scan on our tail. Wide spectrum." "Already doing it," Selma said, her face grim. "I picked up a shadow when we broke orbit from the debris field." "A shadow?" Jenny asked. "A ship running cold," Harold explained. "No transponder, no heat signature. Just a hole in the star field where stars should be." "Show me," Harold ordered. Selma threw the sensor data onto the main screen. It was faint, barely a glitch in the background radiation, but it was there. A silhouette sleek and predatory, trailing them at a distance of 5,000 kilometers. "That is an interceptor class," Harold assessed. "Too fast for a scavenger, too stealthy for a patrol." "It is Orin Vale," Jenny whispered. The name seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "The Chancellor?" Harold asked. "Why would a high-ranking politician be tailing a garbage scow?" "Because," Jenny said, looking at her broken wrist, then at Maggie. "He is the one who suggested we inspect that sector. He said there were family heirlooms lost there." "He sent you into a trap," Harold concluded. He looked at the pouch on his hip. The relic inside gave a sudden sharp throb against his leg, as if acknowledging the name. "Ambassador Reed warned me," Harold muttered to himself. "He said, 'Be careful what you pick up in the dead sectors, Harold. Some trash has owners who do not like to share. He looked at the two sisters. They were terrified, not of the vacuum of space, but of the politics they had just survived. Jenny, for all her bluster and high-born arrogance, was shaking. Maggie was pale, her eyes fixed on the scanner screen. Harold made a decision. He walked back to the biobed. He reached out his massive, calloused hand, hovering over Jenny's good hand. He didn't touch her. He didn't want to break anything else, but the proximity was a silent offer of support. "Selma," Harold said. "Route power to the rear deflectors. Keep the engines at casual speed. Do not let them know we see them." "And if they fire?" Selma asked. "They won't," Harold said. "Not while we have the cargo. They want whatever is in this pouch, or they want these two dead. If they wanted them dead, they would have fired a torpedo by now. They are waiting." "Waiting for what?" Maggie asked. "For us to land," Harold said. "For us to bring you back to the Spire, right into their hands." He looked at Jenny. She was watching him, her golden eyes, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. Just the weary, granite-like resolve of a man who had seen too many wars and paid too many bills. "Let me check that splint," Harold said softly. He knelt beside the bed again. With agonizing slowness, he adjusted the grav splint Dr. Selma had applied. His fingers, thick enough to crush a steel pipe, moved with the precision of a watchmaker. He smoothed the fur on her arm where the splint rubbed. Jenny held her breath. She watched his hands. They were scarred, battered, and ugly, but they were steady. For the first time since she woke up in the dark, screaming, she felt the panic recede. "You are surprisingly gentle," Jenny murmured, almost against her will. "For a golem." "I told you," Harold said, not looking up from his work. "I am a dad. You learn to handle fragile things without breaking them. Eventually." He finished the adjustment and stood up. He looked at the two sisters, then at the black void of space on the monitor where the invisible hunter waited. "Get some sleep," Harold said. "We arrive in 6 hours, and when we land, stay close to me." "Why?" Jenny asked, her chin tilting up in a reflex of defiance. "Because," Harold said, pausing at the door, "gravity is going to get very heavy in the capital, and I am the only one built to carry the weight." He stepped out the door, hissing shut behind him. Inside the medbay, Maggie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at Jenny. "He is," Maggie struggled for the word. "Terrifying," Jenny said. She looked at her bandaged wrist, sensing the phantom warmth of his fingers. "I was going to say warm," Maggie corrected. "Do not be ridiculous," Jenny snapped, lying back and closing her eyes. "He is a rock. Rocks are not warm." But as the ship hummed through the void, carrying them toward a home that was no longer safe, Jenny pulled her injured arm closer to her chest. She could still feel the heat where his hand had been. It was a steady, radiating warmth, like a stone that had sat in the sun all day. Outside, in the corridor, Harold leaned against the bulkhead. He pulled the relic from his pouch. It glowed in the dim light, pulsing with a violet rhythm. "What are you?" he whispered to the stone. The stone hummed back, a sound like a cat purring in a deep, dark cave. Harold shoved it back into his pocket. He brought up a schematic of the Felisari Spire on his wrist computer. He began to highlight structural weak points, exit routes, and ambush zones. He wasn't just a salvager anymore. He was a fortress, and he had just taken in refugees. The black ship trailed them in the silence, a shark following a fishing boat, waiting for the blood to hit the water. But Harold knew something the shark didn't. The fishing boat was armored, and the fisherman was done playing nice. The Felisari Spire did not look like a place where people lived. It looked like a place where gravity went to die. Harold sat in the pilot seat of his salvage hauler, the Rust Bucket, and watched the capital city of the Felisari grow in the viewport. It was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, a suspended needle of glass and white alloy that hung in the upper atmosphere of the planet, like a frozen lightning bolt. Bridges made of spun light connected the floating districts, and the entire structure shimmered with a delicate, iridescent hum. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking. And it made Harold feel incredibly large, incredibly heavy, and incredibly clumsy. "Approach vector locked!" Harold rumbled, his hands moving over the worn controls. "Dr. Selma, how are the passengers?" "They are awake," Dr. Selma replied over the intercom. "And they are criticizing your interior design. Jenny says the color scheme is depression gray and oil-stained black." "It is a functional aesthetic," Harold muttered. As the rust bucket maneuvered toward the docking bays of the Spire, the contrast was painful. The local ships were sleek, teardrop-shaped vessels that moved silently on magnetic currents. Harold's ship moved with the grace of a brick thrown through a window, its thrusters firing with loud chemical bursts that left streaks of soot in the pristine atmosphere. When the docking clamps engaged with a heavy metallic thud that shook the entire hull, Harold sighed. He unbuckled his harness. He checked the pouch at his hip where the relic sat heavy and warm. Then he went to the airlock to face the music. The reception committee was waiting. When the airlock hissed open, mist curling around his boots, Harold stepped out onto a platform of polished marble that seemed far too fragile to support his weight. He was wearing his formal jumpsuit now, though it still looked like mechanic's wear compared to the flowing silken robes of the Felisari delegation. Jenny and Maggie stepped out behind him. The transformation in their demeanor was instant. On the ship, they had been survivors, scared, hurt, and huddled. Here they were royalty. Despite the cast on Jenny's wrist and the soot still clinging to their fur, they held their heads high, their golden eyes sweeping over the crowd with practiced arrogance. A tall Felisari male stepped forward. He wore robes of deep crimson and a headdress of woven silver. He looked at Harold, not with hostility, but with the sort of detached curiosity one might show a particularly large, dirty insect. "I am High Counselor Vorn," the man said. His voice was melodic like wind chimes. "We were told the air and the blood copy were retrieved by a scavenger." Harold felt the air in the room freeze. He looked at Jenny. "Air." He looked at Maggie. "Blood copy." Jenny did not look at him. She stared straight at the counselor. "I am Jenny Cale, first daughter of the house, and this is my sister Maggie, and the scavenger is the reason we are not frozen meat in the dead sector." The counselor's eyes flickered to Harold. He looked at the heavy boots, the thick neck, the sheer density of the Terran standing before him. "A Terran," Vorn said, the word tasting sour in his mouth. "You are substantial." "I take up space," Harold agreed, his voice flat. "It is a habit." "We will take them from here," Vorn said, gesturing to a squad of guards clad in white ceramic armor. "You may send your invoice to the Trade Ministry. Do not expect prompt payment. We must verify you did not cause the crash to claim the salvage fee." Harold stepped forward. It was a single step, but it was heavy enough to make the crystal floor vibrate. The guards flinched. "I do not want payment yet," Harold said. "I want to ensure they are safe. The crash was not an accident. It was a frequency attack." "Preposterous!" a new voice cut through the air. The crowd parted. A man walked through. He was Felisari, but he moved with a predator's grace that made the others look like domesticated pets. He wore a suit of midnight blue tailored to perfection. His smile was thin, sharp, and did not reach his eyes. "Chancellor Oren Vale," Maggie whispered. Harold heard the fear in her voice. Oren stopped in front of Harold. He was a head shorter than the Terran, but he projected a different kind of weight, the weight of absolute political power. "You must be the rescue hero," Oren said softly. He looked Harold up and down, his eyes lingering on the pouch at Harold's hip. "You have done a great service to the Spire. But I wonder, did you find anything else in the wreckage? Perhaps something that does not belong to a salvage manifest?" Harold met the Chancellor's gaze. "Just dust and debris, Chancellor, and 2 broken passengers," Oren smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Terrans, Always holding on to things too tight. You should be careful. The spire is fragile. If you drop something here, the echoes last forever. He turned to Jenny. He reached out and took her uninjured hand, bowing low, to kiss her knuckles. "Welcome home, Lady Jenny," Orin purred. "We were worried your impulsiveness had finally cost you everything." Jenny snatched her hand back. "Save your concern for the Poles, Orin. I am tired. I want to go to my quarters." "Of course," Orin said, stepping aside. "But the Terran stays in the guest wing, far from the royal suites. We cannot have him contaminating the atmosphere." Jenny opened her mouth to argue, but she looked at the guards, then at Orin's smiling face. She realized, as Harold did, that they were not back in a safe harbor. They were in a shark tank. "Fine," Jenny snapped. She turned to Harold. "You, stay out of the way. Do not break anything." She turned on her heel and marched away, Maggie trailing behind her. Maggie glanced back, once her eyes wide and apologetic, before she vanished down the crystalline corridor. Harold stood alone in the center of the platform, surrounded by staring Felisari. "Right," Harold grumbled to himself. "Guest wing. I bet the bed is too short." The guest wing was indeed beautiful, and completely unsuited for human habitation. The walls were made of semi-transparent quartz that let in the starlight, which meant it was freezing. The furniture was delicate, spindly stuff that looked like it would snap if Harold placed his helmet on it. Night had fallen over the spire. The temperature in the upper atmosphere plummeted. The heating systems in the guest wing hummed, but they were calibrated for Felisari physiology, which preferred a cool, crisp air. For a human, it was chilly. For a Felisari in shock, it was dangerous. Harold was sitting on the floor. He did not trust the chairs, cleaning the carbon scoring off his armor plating when the door chime rang. He stood up and palmed the control. The door slid open. Jenny and Maggie were standing there. They were shivering. Not just shivering. They were vibrating. Their fur was puffed out, standing on end. Jenny's teeth were chattering so hard, Harold could hear the clicking from 3 feet away. Her skin, visible under her thin silk nightrobe, was a pale, unhealthy lavender color. Jenny stammered, her pride warring with her biology. "The climate control in our suite is malfunctioning." "Orin turned it off," Maggie supplied, hugging herself. "He knows we are in shock. Felisari cannot regulate body heat well after trauma. He is trying to force us to come to him for aid." "But I will not," Jenny hissed, though the effect was ruined by a violent shudder. "I will not ask that snake for a blanket." Harold looked at them. He looked at the thermometer on his wrist. It was 10 degrees Celsius in the corridor. "Come in," Harold said, stepping back. They shuffled inside. The room was not much warmer. "Dr. Selma," Harold barked at his wrist comms. "Get up here. Bring the thermal blankets from the ship." "I am at the security checkpoint," Dr. Selma's voice crackled back, sounding annoyed. "They are holding me. They say my medical scanner is a Class 3 weapon. It will take me an hour to clear this red tape." Jenny groaned and sank onto the floor, curling into a ball. "I am going to freeze to death in my own palace. This is humiliating." Maggie sat next to her, trying to rub warmth into Jenny's shoulders, but her own hands were like ice. Harold looked at them. He looked at the useless, spindly furniture. He looked at his own massive armored form. He sighed. It was the sigh of a man who knew he was about to do something that would be very difficult to explain to HR. "I have a high metabolic rate," Harold said, "and my armor has a thermal regulation layer powered by a microfusion cell. I run at about 40 degrees Celsius right now." Jenny looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "What are you saying, Terran?" "I am saying," Harold said, sitting down heavily on the floor, with his back against the wall, legs extended, "that I am a radiator. If you want to survive the next hour until the doctor gets here, you need to use the resources available." Jenny stared at him in horror. "You want us to huddle with you?" "I am not making a pass at you, Your Highness," Harold said dryly. I am making a medical suggestion. You are turning blue." Maggie did not hesitate. She crawled over to Harold. She sat next to his left side, leaning her head against his armored shoulder. She let out a long, shaky breath. "Oh," Maggie whispered. "He is warm. Jenny, he is very warm." Jenny watched her sister. She looked at her own trembling hands. She looked at Harold, who was staring resolutely at the opposite wall, his arms crossed over his chest like a statue. Pride was a powerful force, but hypothermia was stronger. Jenny crawled over. She sat on his right side, stiff as a board. She leaned in tentatively until her shoulder touched his arm. The heat was immediate. It radiated off him like a furnace. It wasn't the dry, suffocating heat of a heater. It was a biological living warmth, amplified by the technology of his suit. "Better?" Harold asked, not moving a muscle. "It is acceptable," Jenny muttered. She shifted closer, then closer. Finally, her body betrayed her mind completely, and she slumped against him, pressing her cheek against the hard composite of his chest plate. She flinched, expecting him to be hard and uncomfortable. But beneath the armor, she could feel the steady, rhythmic thrum of the suit's power supply, and deeper than that the slow, heavy thud of his heart. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, so much slower than a Felisari heart. It sounded like a drum beating in a deep cavern. "You are shaking," Harold noted quietly. "I am cold," Jenny defended weakly. "No," Harold said. He uncrossed his right arm and with agonizing slowness moved it. He did not hug her. He simply created a barrier, his massive arm shielding her from the draft of the room. He didn't touch her directly, just encompassed her space. "You are shaking because you are scared. You are home, but you are not safe." Jenny stiffened. She wanted to slap him again. She wanted to tell him he knew nothing, but the warmth was seeping into her bones, melting the ice in her marrow. "Orin wants the relic," Jenny whispered into his chest plate. "He thinks it is a weapon. If he gets it, he will use it to enslave the council." "He won't get it," Harold said. "How can you be sure?" Maggie asked from his other side. She had fully curled up, her legs tucked beneath her, looking very much like a kitten seeking safety. "He owns the guards. He owns the building." "Because I have it," Harold said simply. "And I am very heavy. It is hard to take things from me." "You are arrogant," Jenny murmured, her eyes drooping. The heat was making her drowsy. "I am stubborn," Harold corrected. "There is a difference." The room was silent for a long time. The wind howled outside the crystal glass, a lonely sound. Inside, the three of them sat in a pile of mismatched biology and technology. "Dr. Selma says you have a daughter," Maggie said softly. "Does she do this?" "When she was small," Harold said. His voice softened, losing its gravelly edge. "She used to sleep on my chest plate when I came back from patrol. She said the hum of the fusion cell helped her sleep." "You are a strange creature," Jenny said, her voice slurred with sleep. "You are made for war. You are metal and scars. But you feel safe." "I am an anchor," Harold said, repeating Maggie's words from the ship. "I just hold the line." "An anchor," Maggie repeated. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling the vibration through the armor. "Yes, that is it. The world spins, but you do not." The door chimed. "Dr. Selma is here," Harold announced, but he didn't move. He couldn't. He had a sleeping princess on one arm and a drowsy clone on the other. "Come in," Harold yelled. The door slid open. Dr. Selma marched in carrying a bundle of thermal blankets. She stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at the pile on the floor. "Well," Dr. Selma said, a smirk curling her lips, "I see you have deployed the tactical cuddle. Is this standard operating procedure, Commander?" "They were hypothermic," Harold grumbled, his face turning a slightly darker shade of red. "Just give me the blankets, Selma." "I am sure they were," Selma teased, draping a heavy thermal foil over the three of them. You are a certified dad heater, Harold. You should put that on your resume. Jenny stirred, but didn't wake. She gripped the edge of Harold's armor tighter in her sleep. Harold looked down at her. Her face, usually sharp with disdain, was soft now. She looked young. She looked like someone who had been carrying the weight of a kingdom for too long and had finally found a place to set it down. "Stay with them," Harold whispered to Selma. "I need to check the perimeter." "You are not going anywhere," Selma said, sitting in the only chair. "If you move, you will wake them. And frankly, Harold, looking at your vitals, I think you need the rest as much as they do." Harold grunted. He leaned his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes. The weight of the two sisters against him was significant, but for the first time in years, the gravity didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose. The next morning brought sunlight that shattered through the crystal walls, turning the room into a prism of blinding color. It also brought Nina. Harold had barely managed to extricate himself from the sleeping sisters and make coffee, a thick black sludge he brewed in a portable press when the door opened. A holographic projection drone floated in. It projected Nina's image, life-size, standing in the middle of the room. She was wearing her academy uniform, but her tie was undone, and she had grease on her cheek. "Dad!" Nina shouted. Jenny shot up from the makeshift bed of blankets on the floor, hissing like a startled cat. Her hair was a mess, standing up in every direction. Maggie rolled over and groaned, covering her eyes. "Nina," Harold said, putting down his coffee. "Volume, please." "Sorry," Nina whispered, then immediately got loud again. "I got clearance. Ambassador Reed patched me through. He said you are in a delicate diplomatic situation." "Is that code for Dad got arrested again?" Nina looked around the room. Her eyes landed on Jenny and Maggie, who were looking at the hologram with mixture of confusion and sleep deprivation. "Oh, my stars!" Nina gasped. "They are still here, the Royal Space Cats." Jenny froze. She blinked. "Royal Space Cats," Harold winced. "Nina, this is Lady Jenny and Lady Maggie. Please show respect." Nina ignored him. She leaned into the camera, inspecting Jenny. "You look way less scary with bedhead. Do you guys purr? Dad says you purr, but he says it is a physiological resonance, which is boring talk for purring." Jenny stood up. She pulled the thermal blanket around her like a royal cloak, attempting to regain her dignity. "I am the heir to the Felisari throne child. I do not purr for entertainment. And space cat is a reductive term for a species with 10,000 years of history." "Cool," Nina said. "I have a history exam tomorrow. Can I interview you? I will give you extra credit if you tell me how you do that thing with your ears." Jenny reached up and touched her ear, which flicked involuntarily. Her face turned a deep shade of violet, a Felisari blush. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Everyone she met either bowed, plotted to kill her, or tried to marry her for power. This human child just thought her ears were cool. Jenny stammered. She looked at Harold. "Is she always this relentless?" "She gets it from her mother," Harold lied. "Actually, she gets it from watching salvage negotiations." "I like her," Maggie said, sitting up and smiling. "She is honest. We do not have much honesty in the Spire." "Hey, Dad," Nina said, turning back to Harold. "Pip is trying to calibrate your translation matrix. He says you said something weird to them last night." Harold frowned. "I said nothing weird." A small, spherical droid, Pip, floated in behind the hologram of Nina. It beeped excitedly. "Translation log error," Pip's synthesized voice chirped. "Correction. When subject Harold said, 'I am an anchor,' the translation matrix interpreted anchor as genetic binding partner for permanent nest building." The silence in the room was absolute. Jenny's eyes went wide. She looked at Harold. "You proposed a nest." Harold choked on his coffee. No, I did not. I meant a heavy object, a metal weight, a boat stopper." "Genetic binding partner," Pip repeated helpfully. "Context, high body heat transfer. Proximity. Conclusion, Mating ritual initiated. Maggie dissolved into giggles. She laughed so hard, she fell back onto the blankets. Jenny looked at Harold. His face was a mask of horror. He, the veteran of a dozen wars, was blushing. It was a slow, creeping redness that rose from his neck to his hairline. "I apologize," Harold said stiffly. It was a metaphor. A naval metaphor. "I have no intention of nest building." Jenny looked at him. She looked at his flustered face, the panic in his eyes. For the first time, the terrifying golem looked human. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Then another. She let out a soft laugh. "It is a pity," Jenny said, her voice teasing. "You generate excellent heat. A nest might be practical." Harold stared at her. Was she flirting, or was she mocking him? With Felisari, it was hard to tell. "I am going to check the ship," Harold announced, grabbing his helmet. "Nina, do your homework. Pip, reboot your language banks. If you translate pass the salt as a marriage vow, I will scrap you." He fled the room. When the door closed, Jenny looked at Maggie. The smile lingered on her face, softening the sharp angles of her features. "He runs fast for a heavy man," Jenny noted. "He is running from feelings, sister," Maggie said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "Men can run very fast when feelings are chasing them." Later that afternoon, the mood shifted. The levity of the morning evaporated as the reality of their situation set in. Harold was in the corridor arguing with a guard who refused to let him enter the council chamber. Inside the room, Maggie sat on the floor with the relic. She had cleaned the dirt off it. It was a beautiful object, a dodecahedron of violet crystal, etched with markings that predated the Felisari civilization. Maggie held it in her lap. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. She slowed her heart. The relic was silent. "Why won't you speak?" Maggie whispered. "You hummed for him." She thought about the night before, the sound of Harold's heart. Thump, thump, thump. She began to tap her finger against the crystal, mimicking the rhythm. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The crystal flickered. A faint light pulsed deep within the core. Then Maggie added her own sound. She leaned close and let out a low, sub-vocal purr, the Felisari resonance frequency used for healing and comfort. The reaction was violent. The crystal flared bright white. A shockwave of sound inaudible to the ear, but deafening to the mind, expanded outward. The room shook. The glass walls vibrated. Maggie gasped and dropped the relic. It rolled across the floor, glowing intensely. The door slammed open. Harold rushed in, his weapon drawn. Jenny was right behind him. "What happened?" Harold yelled. "I felt a tremor." "It responded," Maggie said, her voice trembling. She pointed at the relic. "It needs 2 keys, Harold. It needs the Felisari resonance, and it needs a Terran heartbeat, or something that mimics the heavy gravity rhythm of Earth." Harold holstered his weapon. He walked over and picked up the relic. As soon as it touched his hand, the violent shaking stopped. It returned to a gentle, warm pulse. 2 keys, Harold muttered. "A lock that requires 2 species to open. That is why Orin cannot use it. He has the resonance, but he lacks the weight." "He needs you," Jenny realized. Her face went pale. "Orin does not just want the relic back. He wants you. He needs a Terran to activate the weapon." "He wants to turn me into a battery," Harold surmised. "And he wants you to control the frequency." Before they could process this, Harold's wrist comms beeped. It was a priority message. Encrypted. Harold tapped the screen. Text scrolled across the display. Sender Office of the Chancellor. Message. "The diplomatic immunity of your vessel has been revoked due to a sanitation violation. Your daughter's visa is tied to your ship's status. If you do not deliver the item and the passengers to the high tower within 1 hour, we cannot guarantee the safety of the young female Terran currently in orbit." Harold read the message twice. The air in the room changed. The warmth that Harold usually radiated seemed to turn into a cold, hard vacuum. He looked at the image of Nina on his other screen. She was offline now. The connection had been cut. He threatened Nina, Harold said. His voice was very quiet. It was the voice of a man who had just decided that rules no longer applied. Harold, Jenny said, reaching out to touch his arm. We can negotiate. We can know, Harold said. He turned to face them. His gray eyes were like steel plates. Negotiation is for people who have something to lose. He just threatened the only thing I care about. He walked to the window. He looked out at the spire at the beautiful fragile city that hung in the sky. This is not a rescue anymore, Harold said. It is a siege. He turned back to the sisters. Suit up. Maggie, secure that relic. Jenny, you said you are the airtime to act like one. We are going to the high tower. To surrender, Maggie asked fearfully. Harold grabbed his helmet and locked it onto his collar with a hiss of pressurization. The faceplate remained open, showing a grim, terrifying smile. No, Harold said. We are going to teach the Chancellor a lesson about gravity. What lesson is that? Jenny asked, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. That when you pull on something heavy, Harold said, checking the charge on his plasma cutter, it tends to fall on you. The grand hall of the Felisari Spire was a cavern of light and judgment. It was constructed entirely of translucent, spun silicate that refracted the light of the binary stars outside into a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. To the Felisari elite, moving through the space, the light was an enhancement to their natural grace. To Harold, it felt like walking inside a diamond that was slowly trying to cut him. A trade gala was in progress. It was a chaotic swirl of silk robes, hushed political whispers, and the clinking of crystal flutes. Harold stood behind Jenny and Maggie, his hands clasped behind his back, in a parade rest stance. He felt less like a guest and more like a seawall, trying to hold back a tide of perfume and disdain. He was wearing the formal dress uniform of the Terran Vanguard, a relic from his service days, which was stiff, dark gray, and woefully out of place amidst the flowing pastel finery of the court. "Stop breathing so loudly," Jenny whispered, not turning her head. She held a glass of nectar with a hand that was perfectly steady, though Harold knew her wrist was still throbbing beneath the silk wrap. "I am breathing at standard regulation volume," Harold replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the floor beneath them. "It is the air here. It is thin. I have to work harder to get oxygen." "You are a wall," Maggie murmured, standing close to his elbow. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room at the smiling faces of the courtiers. "A very large, comforting wall in a forest of glass." "Just stay behind the wall," Harold advised. The crowd parted. The silence rippled outward from the center of the room as Chancellor Oren Vale approached. He moved with a liquid grace, surrounded by a sycophantic cluster of trade ministers and guild leaders. Oren wore a tunic of shimmering silver scales that mimicked the skin of a native predator fish. He stopped in front of the trio. His eyes, cold and calculating, slid over Jenny and Maggie before landing heavily on Harold. "And here is our guest," Oren announced, his voice pitched perfectly to carry across the hall. "The savior from the stars. Although looking at him, one wonders if he saved the ladies or merely displaced the air around them." A ripple of polite, cruel laughter ran through the crowd. Harold did not blink. He looked over Oren's head, staring at a distant architectural detail. "Chancellor," Harold acknowledged. "Tell me, Master Harold." Oren stepped closer, invading Harold's personal space. He smelled of synthetic lavender and ozone. "Is it true that Terrans are evolved from primates that lived in dirt? It explains the density. You are like a gravity animal, heavy, slow. Bound to the ground." Jenny stiffened. Her grip on her glass tightened until her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to retort, but Harold spoke first. "I am a parent chancellor," Harold said. His tone was not defensive. It was bored. "We are dangerous in other ways. We are used to dealing with tantrums and messy situations without losing our temper." The silence that followed was absolute. Several courtiers looked at their drinks. Maggie hid a smile behind her hand. Oren's smile froze his eyes, narrowing into slits. "Charming," Oren said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Let us see how well you handle a mess, then." Oren snapped his fingers. A service drone hovered over, carrying a tray of steaming aromatic tea. It was Felisari fire tea, a ceremonial brew, served at near-boiling temperatures corrosive to non-native skin and scalding even to the touch. As the drone passed, it glitched. A sudden jerk of its gyroscope sent the silver pitcher tumbling. A stream of boiling amber liquid arched through the air, aimed directly at Jenny's face. It happened in a fraction of a second. The Felisari in the crowd gasped, but did not move. Their reflexes were fast, but their shock held them frozen. Harold did not freeze. He did not possess the elegance of the Felisari, but he possessed the explosive torque of a hydraulic piston. He stepped forward, his movement a blur of gray uniform, and interposed his massive bulk between Jenny and the liquid. Hiss. The tea splashed across Harold's chest and left shoulder. It soaked instantly into the heavy fabric of his uniform and reached the skin beneath. Steam rose from his shoulder. The smell of singed fabric and burnt sugar filled the air. Jenny flinched back, her eyes wide. She looked at Harold's back, expecting him to scream, to fall to thrash. Harold stood perfectly still. He looked down at the empty pitcher on the floor, then at the spreading stain on his chest. He slowly brushed a droplet of scalding liquid from his lapel. He looked up at the stunned crowd. "I need soothing gel," Harold said, his face completely deadpan. "Does anyone sell it here, or is this a bring-your-own medical supplies type of party?" For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then a nervous titter of laughter broke out, unsure and hysterical. Jenny stared at the back of his neck. She saw the tension in his muscles, the way his jaw was set. She knew he was in pain. That tea was hot enough to warp plastic, and he had taken it. He had taken it for her, without a calculation, without a pause. A sudden fierce heat rose in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was anger, it was pride, but mostly it was possession. She stepped around Harold, placing herself between him and Oren. She drew herself up to her full height, her golden eyes blazing. "This man," Jenny announced, her voice ringing off the crystal walls, "is under the protection of House Kale. If any other accidents occur, I will not file a complaint. I will file a demolition order for this entire hall." She grabbed Harold's uninjured arm, the one that wasn't steaming, and pulled. "We are leaving. Maggie, follow." Oren Vale watched them go. His smile returned thinner and sharper than before. He watched the way Jenny held Harold's arm. "Interesting," Oren whispered to his aide. "She defends the tool. She has formed an attachment. Excellent. Initiate the second phase." They retreated to the Hanging Gardens, a sector of the spire dedicated to bioluminescent flora from the homeworld. It was darker here, quieter. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming orchids. "Sit," Jenny commanded, pushing Harold onto a stone bench. "Take off that jacket. Maggie, find water." "It is just a burn," Harold protested, though he winced as he peeled the soaked fabric of his uniform away from his skin. The skin beneath was angry, and red, blistering rapidly. "I have had worse from a soldering iron." "You are an idiot," Jenny hissed, her hands hovering over the burn, unsure of how to touch him without hurting him. "Why did you move? You are slow. You said you are slow." "I am slow at algebra," Harold grunted. "I am fast at blocking." Maggie returned with a cloth soaked in cool water from a fountain. She applied it gently to Harold's shoulder. "It was a test," Maggie said softly. Her eyes were dark with worry. "Oren wanted to see what you would do. He wanted to see if you would break. And he wanted to see if Jenny would care." "He got his answer," Harold said. He looked at Jenny. You should not have threatened him. It makes you a target. I am already a target, Jenny snapped. She looked away, her jaw working. I am the heir. I am always the target. But you are just the help. You are not supposed to burn for me. That is what the help does, Harold said gently. We carry the heavy things, including the pain. Jenny looked at him. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting shadows across his rugged face. He looked tired. He looked old. But he looked unbreakable. You are not the help, Jenny whispered. You are... She was cut off by a sound. It started as a low vibration in the floor. A hum. It was barely audible, but it felt like a dental drill pressing against the base of the skull. Thrum. Thrum. Ree... Maggie gasped, dropping the wet cloth. She clutched her head. No, not again. What is it? Harold stood up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Resonance, Jenny screamed, falling to her knees. The sound spiked. It was a frequency tuned specifically to the density of Felisari bones. To Harold, it was an annoying whine like a bad microphone feedback. To Jenny and Maggie, it was agony. It was as if every bone in their bodies was being pulled apart by invisible wires. Jenny curled into a ball on the grass, retching. Maggie tried to crawl toward her sister, but collapsed, her limbs refusing to obey. Make it stop, Maggie sobbed, her voice thin and breaking. Please make it stop. Harold spun around. He scanned the garden. The sound was coming from the emitter nodes hidden in the walls, usually used for ambient music, now weaponized. Orin, Harold growled. He looked at the exit. The heavy blast doors at the end of the garden path were sliding shut. We have to move, Harold yelled over the hum. He scooped Maggie up with his left arm. He grabbed Jenny by the waist with his right, ignoring the screaming protest of his burned skin. Hold on, Harold roared. He ran. He ran with the momentum of a freight train. The resonance did not hurt him, but the weight of two adults and the sheer force of his movement jarred his burn. He gritted his teeth, turning the pain into fuel. The blast doors were closing. There was a gap of 1 meter. Then, nearly half a meter. We are not going to make it, Maggie cried out, her eyes squeezed shut against the pain. I am making it, Harold said. He did not slide. He did not slow down. He lowered his shoulder, the armored unburned one, and accelerated. He hit the closing doors like a cannonball. Crunch. The sound of metal buckling was louder than the resonance. The hydraulic motors of the door screamed and died as Harold's sheer mass and velocity forced the gap open. He stumbled through, carrying the sisters into the dark service corridor beyond. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing the sound inside the garden. Silence. The sudden absence of the noise was disorienting. Harold fell to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He lowered Jenny and Maggie to the floor. Jenny was bleeding from the nose. Her eyes were unfocused. Maggie was trembling violently, clutching her sister's hand. Harold knelt over them. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Jenny, Maggie. Harold's voice was rough. He tapped Jenny's cheek. Hey, look at me. Jenny blinked. Her pupils were dilated. She looked at him, trying to piece together the world. The sound, she whispered. It stopped. I took us out of the zone, Harold said. He grabbed Maggie's wrist, checking her pulse. It was erratic but strong. Can you count, both of you? Count to 10. Do you have a rhythm? 1, Maggie whispered. 2, 3. Jenny joined in, her voice thick. 4, are we dead? Not yet, Harold said. But we are trapped. He looked around. They were in a maintenance sublevel. The air was stale and frigid. The lights were dead. The temperature was dropping rapidly. The life support in this section had been cut. Orin is flushing the sector, Harold realized. He is trying to freeze us out. Jenny shivered. It was a violent convulsion that shook her whole body. The resonance attack had left their nervous systems raw, unable to regulate heat. Cold, Jenny chattered. So cold. Harold looked at the blast door. Locked. He looked down the corridor. Dead end. There was a small equipment storage alcove nearby. It was cramped, lined with insulation foam. In here, Harold ordered. He half-carried, half-dragged them into the small space. He sat down in the corner, his back against the cold metal wall. He pulled Jenny and Maggie into his lap. "Same drill as last night," Harold said, his voice softer now. "But tighter. You need every degree of heat I have." Jenny did not argue. She did not complain about his smell or his hardness. She buried her face in his neck. She wrapped her arms around his torso, clinging to him, as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving universe. Maggie curled into his side, pulling his heavy cloak over the three of them. It was dark. The only light came from the faint blue glow of Harold's suit indicators. "I am sorry," Jenny whispered into his skin. Her breath was cool against his burn, but he didn't flinch. "For what?" Harold asked. "For the tea. For the slap," Jenny said. "In the ruins, when you found us. I treated you like a monster, and you keep saving us." Harold rested his chin on the top of her head. Her fur was soft, smelling of ozone and fear. "I told you," Harold said, a half-smile in his voice. "I am still alive to complain about it. You have a strong right hook for royalty." "I was scared," Jenny confessed. The admission hung in the cold air, fragile as glass. "I am always scared. I have to be strong for Maggie, for the house. If I show fear, the sharks smell blood." "You are not weak because you are scared," Harold said. He tightened his arm around her. "You are brave because you are scared, and you keep moving anyway." Maggie spoke up from the darkness near his ribs. "I am scared too." "I know Mags," Harold said. "No," Maggie said. "I am not scared of Warren. I am scared that Jenny will die first." Jenny stiffened in Harold's arms. "She always stands in front," Maggie continued, her voice trembling. "Like today. She stepped in front of you. She always steps in front. And one day something is going to hit her that is heavier than she is." "I am the older sister," Jenny said fiercely, though she squeezed Harold tighter. "That is the job." "No," Harold said. "That is my job. I am the heavy object. You two are the precious cargo. Let me take the hits." "Why?" Jenny asked. She lifted her head, looking at him in the dim blue light. Her face was inches from his. "Why do you care? We are not your species. We are not your family. We are a job." Harold looked at her. He looked at the vertical pupils of her golden eyes, now wide and searching. He felt the rapid beat of her heart against his chest, sinking slowly, with the heavy thud of his own. "You are not a job," Harold said. His voice was low, rough with an emotion he hadn't let himself feel in a decade. "Not anymore." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. The way he held them, protective, desperate, absolute, said everything. The moment stretched warm and intimate in the freezing dark. Then, the light slammed on. The door to the storage alcove hissed open. Blinding white light flooded the space. Harold squinted, shielding Jenny's eyes with his hand. Silhouettes filled the corridor. Armored figures. Security. "Step away from the Chancellor's guests," a voice boomed. Harold felt Jenny tense. He felt her muscles coil to spring. She was going to fight. She was going to scream, to attack, to defend him. "No," Harold whispered. He put a hand on her chest, pushing her gently, but firmly, back against the wall. "Do not move," Harold commanded. "Do not say a word. Oren Vale, step through the line of guards." He looked fresh, calm, and utterly victorious. He looked at the scene, Harold disheveled and burned, huddled in a dark corner with the two sisters. "Disgusting," Oren said, shaking his head. "Kidnapping the heir, dragging them into the maintenance tunnels, triggering the resonance alarms to cover your tracks. You are a desperate man, Harold." "Liar!" Jenny screamed. She tried to lunge, but Harold's arm was a steel bar across her path. "He saved us. You turned on the weapon." She is delirious, Oren said to the captain of the guard. The resonant sickness causes hallucinations and Stockholm syndrome. Look at her. She is clinging to her captor. I am not, Jenny started. Jenny, Harold said. His voice was sharp. It cut through her panic. She looked at him. Stop, Harold said. He looked into her eyes. If you fight him now, he wins. He calls you unstable. He locks you away for your own good. You lose the council. You lose the house. But he will take you, Jenny cried, tears spilling over. Let him, Harold said. I can take it. You stay free. You fight from the outside. He slowly disentangled himself from them. The loss of his warmth was immediate and physically painful. Harold stood up. He raised his hands. I surrender, Harold said loudly. I demand a trial by the Solar Council. Take him, Oren ordered. 2 guards rushed forward, slamming Harold against the wall. They cuffed his hands behind his back with magnetic binders. They kicked his legs apart. Harold did not resist. He let them manhandle him. He let them drag him out of the alcove. As they pushed him down the corridor, he looked back. Jenny was standing in the doorway of the alcove, supported by Maggie. She looked shattered. For the first time, she wasn't the imperious heir or the frightened victim. She was a woman watching the only safety she had ever known being dragged away in chains. Then, Harold saw her. At the far end of the corridor, behind a line of security troops, was a small figure. Nina. She was being held by a large guard, her arms pinned. She wasn't crying. She was biting her lip, her face pale, watching her father being taken. Harold stopped. The guards tried to shove him, but he planted his feet. He became the immovable object one last time. He looked straight at Nina. I am fine, Harold called out. His voice was steady calm, the voice of a dad fixing a scraped knee. Nina, I am fine. Remember to eat dinner. Do your homework. Nina's chin trembled, but she nodded. She understood. Stay calm. Stay smart. The guards shoved Harold again, harder this time. He let himself be moved. He disappeared around the bend of the corridor. Back in the alcove, Jenny sank to the floor. She touched the spot on her arm where Harold's hand had been. It was still warm. She looked at Oren Vale, who was standing over her, smiling that thin, frozen smile. Do not worry, my dear, Oren said, offering a hand. The beast is caged. You are safe now. Jenny looked at his hand. She didn't take it. She stood up on her own, using the wall for support. She wiped the blood from her nose. She wiped the tears from her eyes. When she looked at Oren, her golden eyes were hard. They were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a queen who had just learned the cost of her crown. Yes, Jenny said, her voice cold as the vacuum of space. I am safe. And you, Oren, you have made a mistake. Oh, Oren raised an eyebrow. You took my shield, Jenny whispered, so low only Maggie could hear. So now I have to be the sword. Oren turned and walked away, his laughter echoing down the crystal hall. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken the rock. He didn't realize that rocks don't break. They just wait to be thrown. The containment cell was a masterpiece of Felisari cruelty. It did not use bars. It did not use walls of stone. It used a tuned energy field that vibrated at the exact frequency of the nervous system. For a Felisari, being inside this field was like having every nerve ending stripped bare and brushed with sandpaper. It was designed to induce madness through sensory overload. For Harold, it felt like a sunburn that wouldn't fade. He sat in the center of the room, on the only solid object provided, a low hexagonal plinth. The air around him shimmered with a violet haze. His skin felt tight, hot and itchy. His teeth ached. But he did not scream. He did not pace. He sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. He was conserving oxygen. He was conserving calories. Harold closed his eyes and visualized the schematic of the generator he had seen on the wall outside as they dragged him in. It was a standard resonance emitter. It drew power from the spire's main grid. If the grid fluctuated, the field would flicker. He needed a fluctuation. The door dissolved the energy field, parting like a curtain, and Chancellor Oren Vale stepped through. He was followed by 2 guards who looked nervous, their weapons trained on the sitting man. Oren looked impeccable. His silver scale tunic caught the harsh light of the cell. He held a handkerchief to his nose as if the very presence of Harold was an olfactory offense. "You are quiet," Oren observed. "Most prisoners are begging by now. The field stimulates the pain receptors. It should be agony." "It itches," Harold said. He didn't look up. "Like a wool sweater in summer." Oren's eye twitched. He stepped closer, confident in the guards behind him. "You are a biological absurdity," Oren sneered. "But it does not matter. The council is in emergency session. I have presented evidence, fabricated, of course, but convincing, that you and your rescue team were sent by the Terran Vanguard to destabilize our economy." "Nobody cares about your economy, Oren," Harold said, finally lifting his head. His gray eyes were bloodshot from the energy field, but steady. "We just want the relic." "Ah, the relic," Oren smiled. "It will be returned to its proper owner, me. It is a legacy of the First Dynasty. It controls the Spire infrastructure. With it, I do not just lead the council. I become the Spire." Oren leaned in, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper. "And do not worry about your daughter. Nina, is it my men have secured the safe house? She will be taken to a very secure facility. A boarding school for the chaotic, perhaps. She will be safe as long as you confess to the crimes I have listed." It was a threat wrapped in silk. Harold stared at Oren. He didn't lunge. He didn't roar. He simply tilted his head to the side. "Tell me, Chancellor," Harold asked softly. "Is she scared?" Oren blinked. He had expected rage. He had expected bargaining. He had not expected a calm inquiry about the emotional state of the hostage. "I assume so," Oren stammered, thrown off balance. "She is a child surrounded by armed guards." "Good," Harold said. He looked back down at his hands. "If she is scared, she is thinking. If she is thinking, your guards are in trouble." Oren scoffed. "She is a human child. What can she do against elite security?" "She is my child," Harold said. "And she is expensive. I have paid a lot of tuition for her to learn how to dismantle things." Harold looked up again, and this time the look in his eyes made Oren take a step back. It was not the look of a prisoner. It was the look of a predator waiting for the cage door to rust. "You should go, Chancellor," Harold said. "The air in here is getting heavy." Oren turned and left, signaling the guards to raise the field to maximum intensity. As the violet light flared brighter, burning Harold's skin, he didn't flinch. He just started counting. In the royal suite, the sound of shattering porcelain echoed like a gunshot. Jenny stood over the remains of a priceless vase from the Third Era. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. The guards outside the door did not enter. They had orders to contain, not intervene. Jenny looked at her hands. They were shaking. She clenched them into fists. The vibration didn't stop. "It is not working," Jenny whispered to herself. "Breaking things does not make me feel strong. It just makes a mess." She looked at her reflection in a shard of the vase on the floor. She saw a frightened woman with ears flattened in distress. She saw the heir, who had always relied on her lineage, her title, and her volume to get her way. She thought of Harold. She thought of him standing in the grand hall, steam rising from his chest, asking for soothing gel with a straight face. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't thrown the pitcher back. He had absorbed the pain to control the situation. Control, Jenny realized. Strength is not noise. Strength is capacity. She turned to Maggie. Maggie was sitting on the floor by the communications console. She had dismantled the panel and was rewiring it with a silver hairpin. "Maggie," Jenny said, her voice calm for the first time in hours. "Stop crying. We have work to do." Maggie looked up, wiping her eyes. I am not crying, sister. I am leaking optical lubricant due to stress. There is a difference. Can you bypass the localized jamming? Jenny asked. I can piggyback on the emergency medical frequency, Maggie said, her fingers moving with a blur of speed. Dr. Selma is still in the system. Her medical clearance overrides the lockdown. Get her, Jenny ordered, and get Ambassador Reed. I want a paper trail. A paper trail? Maggie asked, confused. We need guns. No, Jenny said, picking up a datapad. Oren wants to be legitimate. He wants a legal coup, so we destroy his legitimacy. Find the shipping manifest for the resonance weapon. Find the energy signatures. If that weapon was brought on board, it had to pass through customs. Oren controls customs, Maggie argued. Oren controls the people, Jenny corrected. But the automated logs, the deep-level server data that belongs to the Spire, and the Spire never lies. Maggie smiled. It was a small, fierce thing. I can find it. I saw the energy signature in the ruins. I know what to look for. Good, Jenny said. She walked to the window, looking out at the city that was slowly turning into a war zone. Harold is holding the line. It is time we returned the favor. In the secure, safe house on the lower levels, the situation was indeed deteriorating, but not for the prisoner. Nina sat at a metal table. Across from her stood a massive Felisari guard in full riot gear. He held a stun baton. Nina held a tablet. So, Nina said, her voice bright and cheery. According to my physics presentation, which is due next Tuesday, the thermal expansion of the ventilation ducts in this sector is currently at critical mass. She tapped the screen. A holographic projection of the building appeared, flashing angry red warning lights. The guard frowned. I have no orders regarding ventilation. That is because the sensor relays are bypassed, Nina explained, lying with the effortless grace of a teenager trying to extend a curfew. But look at the readings. If the pressure isn't released in 3 minutes, the conduits will rupture. Superheated plasma. Very messy. It melts armor. Like soup. The guard looked nervous. He keyed his comms. Command, this is Unit 4. The prisoner is claiming a structural anomaly. Pip, floating innocently behind Nina, intercepted the frequency. Translation error, Pip chirped loudly. Correction, prisoner states, thermonuclear destabilization imminent. Recommended action, evacuate immediately. Run. Do not look back. The guard went pale. Thermo what? It is a Terran term, Nina said helpfully. It means big boom. A siren began to wail. It was actually the fire alarm for the toaster oven in the kitchenette, which Nina had rigged to overheat 30 seconds ago, but the guard didn't know that. The core is breaching, Pip shrieked, spinning in circles, flashing red lights. The guard panicked. Self-preservation overrode orders. He unlocked the door and bolted down the hallway. Wait, Nina called after him. You forgot your baton. She didn't wait. She grabbed her backpack, grabbed Pip, and scrambled into the ventilation shaft she had loosened earlier. Good job, Pip, Nina whispered as she crawled through the dusty duct. I am a diplomat, Pip replied indignantly. Lying is against my programming. It wasn't a lie, Nina said, kicking the grate shut behind her. The toaster really did explode. Now lead me to the detention block. Dad is probably getting bored. The first explosion shook the spire at twilight. It wasn't a military strike. It was Oren's own forces, blowing the docking clamps of the rust bucket to prevent any Terran escape. But on the public broadcast, Oren's face appeared grave and somber. Citizens of Felisari, Oren announced, his image projected on the clouds outside the tower. The Terrans have sabotaged the port. They threaten our stability. For the safety of the Spire, I am declaring martial law. Furthermore, to cement the alliance of our factions and restore order, Lady Jenny Kale has agreed to join her house with mine. In the cell, Harold heard the boom. He felt the vibration through the floor. He opened his eyes. He is rushing, Harold muttered. He is not waiting for the trial. The energy field hummed around him. Harold stood up. His skin was raw red and blistering in places, but his muscles were still functioning. He walked to the edge of the field. The violet light crackled, warning him back. Standard resonance field, Harold analyzed. Designed to overload nerves. But it relies on a feedback loop. If the target does not react, the loop destabilizes. He took a breath. He thought of Nina crawling through a vent. He thought of Jenny standing in front of him in the garden. He stepped into the field. The pain was absolute. It was like stepping into a fire. Every inch of his skin screamed. His vision whitened. But Harold did not back down. He pushed forward. He forced his density, his sheer physical mass against the energy barrier. He became a resistor in a delicate circuit. Just walk, he told himself. It is just pain. Pain is information. Ignore the information. The generator whined. It wasn't designed to push back against something this solid. It was designed to torture, not to contain a tank. Harold roared. It was a guttural sound, deep and terrible. He took another step. The emitters sparked. Smoke poured from the wall nodes. The field flickered, struggled to maintain cohesion around his mass, and then, with a sound like a breaking violin string, it shattered. Harold stumbled forward, smoking. His uniform was singed. His skin was angry. But he was free. The door to the cell was made of reinforced alloy. Harold didn't bother hacking the lock. He backed up 3 paces. He lowered his shoulder. He hit the door with every ounce of frustration he had held back for 2 days. Clang. The door warped. He hit it again. Crunch. The hinges gave way. The door flew off its frame and skidded down the hallway, taking out a startled guard who had been standing post. Harold stepped into the corridor. 3 more guards were there. They raised their weapons. "Halt!" one shouted, his voice shaking. "Target is loose!" Harold didn't stop. He broke into a run. But he didn't draw a weapon. He didn't have one. The first guard fired a stun bolt. Harold took it in the chest. He didn't even slow down. He plowed into the guard, wrapping his arm around the man's waist and tossing him aside like a bag of laundry. Soft landing, Harold calculated. Broken ribs, maybe. But alive. The second guard swung a baton. Harold caught it mid-swing. He twisted the weapon from the guard's grip and used the momentum to sweep the guard's legs. The man hit the floor. Concussion. Recoverable. The third guard dropped his weapon and ran. Harold kept moving. He wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a father running into a burning building. He wasn't killing. He was clearing obstacles. "Pip!" Harold barked into his comms, hoping the channel was open. Location. "Dad," Nina's voice came through clear and beautiful. "I am in the vents above Sector 7. I am heading to the throne room. Orin has the sisters." "Stay in the vents," Harold ordered, turning a corner and shoulder-checking a blast door open. "I am coming." The corridor leading to the throne room was filled with smoke. The emergency lights bathed everything in a strobing red glare. Harold rounded the corner and nearly collided with 2 figures, Jenny and Maggie. They were flanked by 4 loyalist guards, armed with weapons they had raided from the armory. Jenny was wearing a combat flight suit she must have stolen. It was too big for her, but she looked fierce. "Harold!" Jenny gasped. She looked at him. He was a wreck. His skin was burned from the field. His uniform was in tatters. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Harold stopped. He breathed heavily, looking at them. "You are out," Harold said, relieved. "We escaped," Maggie said, holding a data drive. "We have the proof. But Orin has Nina. He took her from the vents. He knew she would come for us." Harold's face went cold. The relief vanished. "Where?" Harold asked. "Throne room," Jenny said. She reached out and touched his burned arm. "Harold, you look terrible." "I have had better Tuesdays," Harold rasped. Jenny looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the burns he had taken to escape. She saw the way he was standing shielding them, even now, even when he could barely stand. "You are..." Jenny shook her head, a tear cutting through the soot on her face. You are a bad habit, Harold. You never know when to stop. Harold managed a cracked smile. You haven't seen Nina's habits yet. She eats cereal without milk. It is unnatural. Move, Jenny commanded her guards. We take the throne room. We get the girl. The throne room was a vast domed chamber at the very top of the spire. The floor was polished obsidian. The walls were transparent, looking out into the infinite starfield. Oren Vale stood by the high seat. In one hand, he held the relic. It was glowing, violently pulsing with an unstable light. In the other hand, he held a pistol pointed at Nina's head. Nina was kneeling on the floor. She looked small. She looked pale. But she wasn't crying. She was looking at the relic, calculating its pulse rate. Harold burst through the doors, followed by the sisters. Stop! Oren screamed. One step closer, and the girl becomes physics. Harold froze. He held up his empty hands. He signaled Jenny to stop. Let her go, Oren, Harold said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a tectonic plate. You want the relic. You have it. I want compliance, Oren shouted. I want the Terran influence gone. I want the spire to be pure. He looked at the relic. This stone, it resists me. It fights me. Why? Because it requires two keys, Maggie called out. Resonance and weight. You have the voice, Oren, but you have no weight. You are hollow. Silence. Oren waved the gun wildly. Harold, kneel before the Chancellor or your daughter dies. Jenny stepped forward. Do not do it, Harold. He will kill you anyway. Harold looked at Nina. She was watching him. It is okay, Dad, Nina whispered. Harold looked at Oren. He looked at the gun. Slowly, deliberately, Harold bent his knees. He didn't kneel like a defeated man. He knelt like a knight. He kept his back straight. He kept his eyes on Oren. He lowered his massive frame until his knee touched the black glass of the floor. Clack. The sound of his armor hitting the floor echoed in the silence. Jenny gasped. She had never seen him lower himself. He was the wall. He was the anchor. Anchors didn't kneel. See, Oren laughed, a high, manic sound. The heavy beast learns to sit. I am not sitting, Harold said softly. I am lowering my center of gravity. What? Oren frowned. Nina, Harold said. Now. Nina dropped flat to the floor. At the same instant, Maggie hit a button on the remote console she had been holding behind her back. She had synced the building's PA system to the relic's frequency. A blast of feedback, a screeching, high-pitched mechanical wail, erupted from every speaker in the room. Oren screamed and clutched his head. The sound shattered his concentration. He dropped the gun. Harold moved. From his kneeling position, he launched himself forward. He was a coiled spring, releasing all its tension. He covered the 10 meters in a single heartbeat. He didn't hit Oren. He tackled Nina, curling his body around her, turning his armored back to the Chancellor, just as the relic exploded, with a shockwave of uncontrolled energy. Boom! The shockwave hit Harold's back. It stripped the plating off his suit. It seared his skin, but he didn't move. He held Nina. He took the fire. Jenny saw Oren scrambling for the relic, which was now spinning on the floor, cracking the glass beneath it. Guards! Jenny shouted, her voice, finding the authority she had been searching for. Protect the civilians. Seal the exits. Do not let the traitor escape. The guards hesitated, looking at Oren, then at Jenny. Jenny stood tall. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen. I said move, she roared. The guards obeyed. They rushed to secure the perimeter. Oren saw the tide turning. He grabbed the relic, which burned his hand, making him shriek, and ran for the emergency lift behind the throne. After him, Maggie yelled. No, Harold groaned. He rolled over, releasing Nina. He was smoking. His armor was gone from the waist up. Let him go. The Foundation look. They looked down. The floor was cracking. The shockwave had destabilized the structural integrity of the throne room. The cracks were spreading outward from where the relic had spun, looking like a spiderweb of fractured light. "The spire is breaking," Maggie whispered. Harold sat up, wincing. He pulled Nina into a hug, checking her for injuries. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading. "I got the physics wrong," Nina sobbed into his shoulder. "I thought the relic was a capacitor. It is an amplifier. I almost blew us up." "You did good, kid," Harold said, kissing the top of her messy hair. "You bought us the second we needed." Jenny walked over. She knelt beside them, disregarding the dirt and blood on the floor. She looked at the cracks running through the heart of her home. "He broke it," Jenny said softly. "He broke the spire." "It was already broken," Harold said, looking at the cracks. "He just showed you where the weak points were." Maggie joined them. She traced a crack with her finger. "This fracture pattern," Maggie said, her eyes narrowing. "It is not random. It is spiraling downward. It is pointing somewhere." "Where?" Jenny asked. "Down," Maggie said. "To the dead sectors. To the ruins where you found us." Harold struggled to his feet, pulling Nina up with him. He winced, holding his ribs. "It is a loop," Harold realized. "The relic came from the ruins. It wants to go back to the ruins. And Orin is taking it there." "Why?" Nina asked. "Because that is where the rest of the machine is," Harold said. "The spire is just the antenna. The engine is in the graveyard." Jenny stood up. She looked at Harold, battered and burned. She looked at her sister. She looked at the ruined throne room. "Then we go to the graveyard," Jenny said. "We finish this where it started." "I need a new shirt," Harold muttered, looking at his bare, singed chest. "I will buy you 10, Jenny said, and for the first time she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm. "After we save the world." The return to the wreckage of the Star Freighter felt less like a tactical insertion and more like walking into a grave that had been dug specifically for them. Harold moved through the twisted corridors of the ruins, his boots crunching on layers of crystallized dust. The silence here was different from the silence in the spire. In the spire, silence was a luxury of the elite. Here, silence was the sound of death. He walked, point his plasma cutter held low. Behind him, Jenny and Maggie moved with the silent, predatory grace of their species, though Harold could hear their breathing, rapid, shallow, stressed. Nina was in the center of the formation, flanked by the sisters clutching Pip, as if the small droid were a teddy bear made of chrome. "The readings are spiking," Maggie whispered, checking the scanner she had salvaged from the rust bucket. "The ambient energy here is not just radiation. It is a signal." Harold touched the pouch at his hip. The relic was no longer just warm. It was hot. It pulsed against his leg with a rhythm that matched his own stride. Thump. Thump. "It knows we are here," Harold said, his voice a low rumble in the stale air. "It recognizes the gravity." They reached the central chamber, the hollow where Harold had first pulled the sisters from the debris. The space had changed. The debris had been cleared away, pushed to the perimeter by gravlifters, revealing a massive, ancient mechanism beneath the floor plates. It looked like a heart made of obsidian and circuitry. Standing at the control console of this machine was Chancellor Orin Vale. He looked unraveled. His silver tunic was torn, his hair wild. He was plugging cables into the console with manic intensity. When he saw them enter, he didn't run. He smiled. "Welcome back," Orin said, his voice amplified by the cavern's acoustics. "It is poetic, is it not? We end where we began." "Step away from the console, Orin," Harold ordered, raising his weapon. "It is over. The spire knows what you did." "The spire knows nothing," Orin shouted, his eyes wide and feverish. "The spire is just an antenna, a receiver. This is the engine." He gestured to the obsidian heart beneath his feet. "The ancients did not just build a city in the clouds," Orin explained, his hands shaking as he made the final connection. "They built a control system for the entire planet, a bio-infrastructure interface, With the relic, I do not just control the lights in the doors. I control the atmosphere. I control the gravity generators. I can turn the air in the capital into vacuum with a single command. I can hold millions of lives hostage. You are insane, Jenny stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing. You would kill your own people to rule them. I would purify them, Orin screamed. And you brought the key right to me. He slammed his hand onto the console. The relic in Harold's pouch let out a shriek of energy. It burned through the fabric, dropping to the floor. It rolled across the metal, drawn by an invisible magnetic tether, until it clicked into a socket at the base of the machine. The room groaned. Light flooded the chamber, violet, harsh, and blinding. Harold, shoot him! Jenny yelled. Harold leveled his plasma cutter. He had a clear shot. Orin was standing exposed, laughing at the sky. One pull of the trigger, and the threat would end. It was the soldier's choice. It was the easy choice. Harold's finger tightened on the trigger. Dad, no. The voice was small, but it cut through the roaring energy like a knife. Harold froze. He felt a small hand grip his wrist. He looked down. Nina was looking up at him, her eyes terrified, but determined. You won, Nina whispered. You already won. If you kill him now, you become the monster he thinks you are. You become the thing I am scared of. Harold looked at Orin. He looked at the madness in the Chancellor's eyes. He realized that Orin was not powerful. He was weak. He was a man drowning in his own ambition, trying to drag the world down with him. Harold lowered the weapon. You are right, Harold said to his daughter. We do not break things unless we have to. Fools! Orin shrieked. Compassion is a defect. He threw a switch. The resonance wave hit them. It was not like the hum in the garden. This was a tsunami. The machine amplified the frequency 1,000 times over. Jenny and Maggie screamed. It was a sound of pure physical agony as the vibration hit their skeletons. They collapsed instantly, writhing on the floor, their hands clutching their heads. Blood began to trickle from their ears. It hurts, Maggie cried out. It is tearing us apart. Even Harold felt it. His teeth rattled in his skull. His vision blurred, but his bones, his dense, heavy Terran bones, held firm. He is killing them, Harold growled. He tried to move toward the console, but the sheer pressure of the energy field pushed him back. It was like walking into a hurricane. I cannot get close, Harold yelled over the roar. The pressure is too high. Maggie, lying on the floor, looked up. Her eyes were unfocused, but her mind was still working. She saw the relic pulsing in the machine. She saw Harold, standing like a rock in the stream. The rhythm, Maggie gasped. Harold, the rhythm. What? Harold shouted, dropping to one knee to shield Nina. The machine is trying to sync with Felisari biology, Maggie yelled, her voice breaking. Disrupt it. Give it a new beat. Give it gravity. Harold understood. He looked at Jenny. She was curled in a ball, fading fast. Jenny! Harold roared. Get up! Jenny opened one eye. I cannot. Yes, you can. Harold grabbed her arm and hauled her up. He grabbed Maggie with the other hand. He pulled them both into his chest, wrapping his massive arms around them. He pulled Nina into the center of the huddle. Listen to me, Harold commanded. Do not listen to the machine. Listen to me. He closed his eyes. He focused on his own heart. The slow, heavy sledgehammer, beat of a high-gravity survivor. Thump, thump, thump. Pip, Harold barked. Amplify my vitals, broadcast my heartbeat on the local frequency. Acknowledged, Pip chirped, extending a small antenna. The sound of Harold's heart blasted through the chamber, amplified by the droid's speakers. It was a deep bass drum sound. Boom, boom, boom. It clashed with the high-pitched whine of the resonance engine. The two rhythms fought for dominance in the air. The dissonance was terrible, a screeching chaos of noise. Orin covered his ears. Stop it! You are ruining the harmony. This is not harmony, Harold yelled. This is noise. He squeezed the sisters tighter. Focus on the beat. Sync with me. Jenny buried her face in Harold's chest. She felt the impact of his heart against her ribs. It was slow. It was steady. It was the sound of the earth of stone of things that endure. She forced her own racing heart to slow down. She forced her breathing to match his. In, out, in, out. Maggie did the same. And then something miraculous happened. The resonance wave passed through them. Instead of tearing them apart, it flowed around the island of stability Harold had created. The pain vanished, replaced by a dull pressure. Jenny looked up. She saw Harold's face. He was grimacing, sweat pouring down his forehead. He was taking the brunt of the feedback. The machine was trying to crush him because he was the anomaly in the system. "You are hurting him," Jenny whispered. She made a choice. For her entire life, Jenny had been the heir. The one to be protected. The one who stood behind the guards. She broke from Harold's grip. "Jenny, no!" Harold shouted. She stepped in front of him. She spread her arms wide, facing the machine. She didn't have armor. She didn't have density. But she had something else. "I am the blood of the spire," Jenny screamed at the machine. "And I deny you." She projected her own resonance, not a purr of comfort, but a roar of command. The machine faltered. It was confused. It had two signals, the heavy gravity of the Terran and the royal command of the Felisari. Orin frantically tried to adjust the controls. "Obey me, I am the Chancellor." "You are nothing." Harold stepped up behind Jenny. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "You are just a man with a remote control." He added his weight to her will. The combination, the heavy anchor, and the sharp sword, hit the machine's logic core. Crack. The obsidian heart fractured. The relic popped out of the socket, smoking. The violet light died, instantly plunging the room back into the dim gray of the emergency lights. Orin fell back, staring at the smoking console. "No, no!" The silence returned. But this time, it was the silence of victory. Harold didn't move to arrest Orin immediately. He walked over to him. Orin scrambled backward like a crab, terrified. "Do it," Orin whimpered. "Throw me into the dark." Harold looked down at him. He reached out a hand. "Stand up, Orin," Harold said quietly. Orin blinked. "What?" "Stand up," Harold repeated. "Look at them." He pointed to the corner where Nina was helping Maggie stand. He pointed to Jenny, who was leaning against a pillar, exhausted, but alive. "You wanted to save the spire," Harold said. "But you never looked at the people living in it. You looked at the architecture. That is why the machine rejected you. It needs a connection. You only had ambition." Orin looked at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. He realized with a crushing finality that he hadn't lost because of a lack of firepower. He had lost because he was alone. Harold turned to Jenny. "He is yours." Jenny walked over. She didn't strike Orin. She didn't scream. She simply removed the signet ring from his finger, the symbol of the Chancellor's office. "You are under arrest," Jenny said, her voice cold and clear. "For treason against the living." The return to the Felisari Spire was not a parade. It was a recovery. The city was wounded. Cracks ran through the crystal domes. The air was thin. But the people were alive. The resonance weapon had been deactivated, and the council, freed from Orin's blackmail, was scrambling to restore order. Harold stood on the balcony of the guest wing, looking at the repair crews working on the great dome. "You are brooding," a voice said. Dr. Selma walked out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him. "I am thinking," Harold corrected. "About leaving?" Dr. Selma asked. Harold took a sip. It was terrible. Real coffee, not the synthetic nectar the Felisari drank. "The job is done," Harold said. "Orin is in a cell. The spire is safe. Nina needs to get back to school. I have a salvage business to run. If I stay, I complicate things." "You mean you complicate her," Selma said, gesturing toward the royal suites. "She is a queen now in all but title," Harold said. I am a mechanic, a heavy worlder. We do not fit Selma. You saw the council. They look at me like I am a walking industrial accident. Dr. Selma sighed. She leaned against the railing. I am going to give you a medical opinion, Harold. Free of charge. I am scared to ask, Harold muttered. You have spent 10 years being a wall, Selma said. You protect Nina. You protect the ship. You protected those 2 women. But walls are lonely things, Harold. They stand on the outside. She looked him in the eye. Do not be so kind that you condemn yourself to be alone. That is not nobility. That is just masochism. Harold stared into his coffee. Before he could answer, the door opened. Maggie stuck her head out. Harold, you must come. They have a demand. Harold groaned. What now? Did I park in a reserved spot? Just come, Maggie said, hiding a smile. The ceremony took place in the Hall of Echoes. The roof was still cracked, letting in shafts of raw sunlight, but someone had filled the cracks with gold alloy, a technique called kintsugi, embracing the beauty of the damage. The entire High Council was there. Jenny stood in the center, wearing a robe of white silk that seemed to float around her. She looked terrified. Harold walked in, still wearing his battered flight suit, because he refused to wear the frilly court clothes. Nina walked beside him, holding a small velvet cushion. Master Harold, the High Speaker announced, the relic has been secured, but our scholars say it is unstable. It has imprinted on a dual frequency, Felisari and Terran. Meaning, Harold asked. Meaning it cannot be locked away, Jenny stepped forward. She looked at Harold, her cheeks turning a faint violet. It needs a constant biofeedback loop to remain inert. It needs guardians. Okay, Harold said slowly. So we assign a guard rotation. It needs a specific biosignature, Jenny said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Yours, and mine. And mine, Maggie added, stepping up. The council has decreed, the speaker continued, that a formal bond must be established. A legal and biological binding to ensure the relic remains dormant. A union of houses. Harold froze. He looked at Jenny. Are you saying marriage? It is a political arrangement, Jenny said quickly. Too quickly. A treaty to keep the weapon safe. Do not read into it. Right, Harold said. A treaty. With rings, Nina piped up, grinning as she held up the cushion. On it sat 3 rings, made of the same obsidian as the machine. Harold looked at the rings. He looked at Jenny, who was trying very hard to look like a politician and failing miserably. She looked like a woman, hoping he wouldn't run away. I have conditions, Harold said. The council gasped. One did not make conditions to the heir. Name them, Jenny said softly. I am not a prince, Harold said. I am not going to sit on a throne and look pretty. I work. I fix things. I raise my daughter. If I stay as myself. I would not want you any other way, Jenny said. And, Harold continued, looking at the council, Orenvale is not executed. He is tried. Fairly. We do not build this new piece on a grave. The council murmured, but Jenny nodded. Agreed. Mercy is the luxury of the strong. Harold took a breath. He looked at Nina. She gave him a thumbs up. He stepped forward. He took one of the rings. Pip, Harold said, translate the vows, and get it right this time. Initiating solemn protocol, Pip beeped. Jenny took a ring. She placed it on Harold's finger. Her hand was small, warm, and trembling. I, Jenny of House Kale, she said, her voice shaking but clear, bind myself to this gravity, not because I need an anchor, but because I trust the man who holds it. Harold took the other ring. He slid it onto Jenny's finger. It was tiny against his massive hand. I, Harold, he said. He paused. He didn't have a house. I, Harold the Dad. I promise to be the wall when the wind blows, but I also promise to be the door. You are not trapped with me. You are free. I just want to be the place you come back to." "Translation," Pip announced loudly. "Subject Harold promises to be a structural load-bearing emotional support unit with open access privileges." The crowd stared. Nina snorted. Maggie giggled. "Close enough," Harold muttered. He looked at Maggie. There was a third ring. "And me?" Maggie asked shyly. "You are the glue," Harold said, sliding the ring onto her thumb because it was too big for her finger. "Without you, we would have killed each other in the first 5 minutes." "I promise to keep you both from being idiots," Maggie vowed solemnity. The high speaker raised his staff. "Then let it be recorded. The Treaty of the Broken Dome is signed." Jenny didn't wait for the applause. She leaned up on her tiptoes. Harold leaned down. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was awkward. Their noses bumped. Harold's stubble scratched her cheek. But when their lips met, the relic, which was sitting on a pedestal nearby, glowed with a soft, steady, contented light. Nina threw confetti she had apparently been hiding in her pockets. "Finally, can we get cake now?" That night, the spire was quiet. Harold sat in the private quarters of the royal suite. He was cleaning his plasma cutter, a nervous habit. Nina was asleep on the plush sofa, Pip hovering in low-power mode beside her. The door to the balcony was open. The air was cool, but not cold. Jenny walked in. She was wearing simple sleeping robes. She looked at Harold, then at Nina. "She is a good child," Jenny said. "She is a terror," Harold said fondly. "But she is my terror." Jenny sat down across from him. She looked at the ring on her finger. She twisted it round and round. "Harold," she said. Her voice was serious. "Yeah, there is something I have to tell you," Jenny said. "Before we start this treaty. I cannot build it on a lie." Harold put down the cutter. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Okay." "The crash," Jenny said. She didn't meet his eyes. "In the ruins, when you found us." "The resonance trap," Harold said. "Orin set it." "Orin set the trap," Jenny whispered. "But we triggered it." Harold went very still. "What?" "We knew about you," Jenny said, the words rushing out now. "Maggie found your file in the veteran database. High-density skeletal structure. Resonance-resistant. We knew Orin was moving the relic. We knew we couldn't touch it without dying. We needed a carrier." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "We stole a transponder. We lured you to that sector. We meant to hire you. But Orin's ship attacked us before we could make contact. We crashed. It went wrong. But Harold, we went there looking for you. To use you." She stopped. She waited for the explosion. She waited for him to yell, to throw the ring, to leave. She deserved it. She had treated him like a tool before she even met him. The silence stretched. It was heavy. Harold looked at her. He looked at the woman who had stepped in front of a resonance cannon for him today. He looked at the scar on her wrist where she had broken it, hitting him. He felt a flash of anger, the soldier's anger at being manipulated. But then, he looked at Nina sleeping on the sofa. He remembered the war. He remembered the desperate things he had done to keep his squad alive. He remembered using people, sacrificing assets, making the hard calls because the alternative was death. He saw the same desperation in Jenny's eyes. She hadn't done it for greed. She had done it to save her world from a madman. Harold sighed. It was a long, deep exhale that seemed to empty the anger out of the room. "You picked a hell of a way to conduct a job interview," Harold said. Jenny blinked. "Are you not furious?" "I am annoyed," Harold said. "I am very annoyed. You scratched my paint job. You almost got me killed. And you made me wear a suit." He stood up and walked over to her. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. "But you also saved my daughter," Harold said. "And today, you stood in front of me when you could have run." He took her hand. He stopped her from twisting the ring. "We all have pasts, Jenny. We all have things we did to survive. I have done things I am not proud of. I am not going to judge you for being desperate." Jenny let out a sob. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I know," Harold said. "But here is the new rule. Clause 1 of the treaty." "What?" Jenny asked, sniffing. "Next time," Harold said, brushing a tear from her cheek with his rough thumb. "Do not use your life as bait, and do not use me as a tool. Use words. Just ask." "I will," Jenny promised. "I will ask." "Good," Harold said. He stood up and pulled her to her feet. "Now are you going to sleep? Because I promised Nina pancakes in the morning, and I need to figure out how to make pancakes in a kitchen that runs on sonic waves." Jenny laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. "I will help you," Jenny said. "Maggie is an excellent cook." "Maggie is asleep in the bathtub," Harold noted. "I think she likes the acoustics." "Then it is just us," Jenny said. She looked at him. The golem, the rock, the husband. "Just us," Harold agreed. He put his arm around her. It was heavy, it was warm, and for the first time in 100 years, the Felisari spire didn't feel fragile. It felt solid. Outside, under the broken but golden-mended dome, the stars shone down. They were cold and distant, but inside the room, gravity was just right.